Welcome to the Center for Victim Research webinar, Evaluating a National Victim Hotline, How We Did It, and What We Learned. This webinar is part of CVR's efforts to foster an evidence base for victim services. Understanding the effectiveness of our hotlines and how to measure that is an important part of this evidence base. I'd like to welcome our presenters. So with me today is Mallory Dusenberry. Mallory has been the Associate Director of the Center for Victim Research. She completed this hotline evaluation project as a Principal Policy Associate at the Urban Institute. And we're also joined by John Kemp, who is the Deputy Director of the Center for Victim and Survivor Services at the National Center for Victims of Crime. His duties include providing oversight to their victim hotline. So with that, I'll turn it over to our presenters.
Right. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us. Let me go ahead and share our slides. Bear with me just a moment. All right, Susan, let me know if that can't be seen. Otherwise, I will go ahead and assume we're good to go and get started. So yes, thank you, Susan, for that introduction and for having us today. I'm Mallory. I'm a victim-focused researcher, technical assistance provider, where I was very happy to co-run the Center for Victim Research with Susan and lead this evaluation that we're talking about here today. Yeah, let's go ahead and get started. We have a lot to cover. We're going to briefly introduce VictimConnect. We'll talk about our evaluation methods, our partnership, how we address some of those challenges that of course come up in any big evaluation like this. And then we'll share a number of findings and what they meant to NCVC and possibly to the field as a whole, as well as some big picture conclusions. But before I go any further, I need to acknowledge that this study was funded by the National Institute of Justice, but the findings and recommendations are our own. And I also want to acknowledge that this evaluation was supported by a large team made up of many researchers from Urban, with a particular shout out to my co-principal investigator, Jennifer Yonner. We also had very strong engagement from leadership at NCVC, including John, who I'm going to turn it over to in just a moment. And the support of 5 advisors from both practice and research. And as we'll share in a moment, this has been a phased evaluation, and a lot of this team has been consistent over that time, which has been a really strong benefit for us as well. All right, so with that introduction complete, I will go ahead and turn it over to John.
Thank you, Mallory, and thank you, Susan, for having us. All right, next slide, please. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what VictimConnect is. The VictimConnect Resource Center is a national referral helpline that serves victims of all crime types. We do this via text, chat, and phone call modalities. We are operational 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Additionally, we provide an online resource map that we'll talk a little bit more about later, of vetted resources and services that allows users to search for support without the help of a victim assistance specialist. Next slide, thanks. Our website, victimconnect.org, offers accessible options to help provide users a customizable experience. In addition to having several bilingual VAS, we utilize a language access line to ensure we can provide services in the visitor's preferred language. At this time, visitors would have to call in to utilize that feature, as we do not yet offer it via text and chat. Our services are completely anonymous, confidential, and free. We do not collect, save, or keep any identifying information from visitors, nor do we store interaction transcripts. Our trained VAS provide emotional support, information, and referrals as needed. We offer a myriad of referrals, as many as one needs, to all kinds of services throughout the U.S. and its territories, and it's based on the visitor's specific needs and requests. Our resource map is a vetted list of organizations and services throughout the U.S. and its territories. The visitors can search on their own. So again, it functions similarly to Google, but specific to vetted resources and organizations that appeal to the needs of each visitor. Our tribal tool is a similar tool, providing guidance to services specific to American Indian and Alaskan Native populations. Next slide. And finally, our Hotline Consortium is a group of hotlines and helplines that come together to share capacity for the improvement of systems and services. And we are currently 23 members strong. Thank you. Back to you, Mallory.
All right. So let's talk about how we evaluated VictimConnect. So about 5 years ago, we launched this phased evaluation. And the main idea was to understand whether, NCVC's team was operating the helpline as John just described and achieving the outcomes that NCVC envisioned. As I mentioned, it's a phased approach because VictimConnect had never undergone an evaluation before. We proposed to start with a phase 1 formative evaluation, which really just explores the program's evaluability and its readiness to undergo a more rigorous evaluation. So that was largely conducted during and up to 2020. And once we determined that VictimConnect was ready, we then went back to NIJ to seek funding to conduct a phase 2 implementation and outcome evaluation, which is what is wrapping up this month after 3 years. The idea behind phase 3, which is grayed out on your screen, is that we can use a lot of what we learned and produced to help others conduct similar evaluations of their hotlines. We created a lot of survey and observation tools that will be made public and can be used by others to assess their own program success. So yes, future replication efforts, hopefully. So briefly about the formative evaluation, it really focused on 2 things. First, listening and learning from people at NCVC about the program, its history, its goals, and who it was trying to help. And then 2 is working together to develop a framework for evaluating, how it's actually being operated, which is the implementation piece, and measuring its outcomes. We produced a lot of materials in this space that are published on Urban's website and available for anybody to read, learn from, and borrow if you think your program's more at the formative stage. The main takeaways for us for this phase were really that foundation of VictimConnect being based in what we know to be promising practices for responding to crime survivors. So we were able to really assess that staff are using, crisis intervention theory principles by prioritizing visitors' immediate safety needs, adopting empathetic response, some of these big kind of core tenets that John talked about. And that, VictimConnect's overall goals are to help address victims' needs using, trauma-informed, victim-centered, strengths-based approaches. Another, kind of key takeaway of our formative evaluation was making sure that NCVC had enough staffing and enough internal data and properly documented data in place to support evaluation, which we kind of helped them think through. And then lastly, we helped develop a logic model for VictimConnect, which is right here. So the logic model, again, a lot of text, like most logic models, a lot of detail, really clarifies how VictimConnect aims to operate and help survivors. So it answers questions like, what are the main objectives that VictimConnect's trying to achieve? What level of staffing and resources are needed to operate successfully? What are the core activities that it offers? What outputs can show whether it's carrying out those activities, and then finally, what are the outcomes that VictimConnect hopes to achieve. So there is a lot of collaboration between us as researchers and NCVC as the practitioner to develop it. And then it's really helped inform all the other components of our current evaluation. And I particularly have been using it to assess VictimConnect's implementation during this phase. And then for the researchers in the room, I also want to note that we're using 2 kind of widely accepted evaluation metrics to inform our assessment of VictimConnect as well. So for the implementation side, I'm using 5 of Proctor and colleagues' 8 implementation outcomes that were deemed most relevant for VictimConnect. And then for the outcome evaluation, we're looking at, all 4 levels described by Kirkpatrick. So just a little additional kind of framework setting here. So what are we looking at now? Through our work on the logic model and our collaboration with NCVC and the advisors, we identified 4 overarching research questions to answer in our current evaluation. So 1, does VictimConnect increase access to victim services? 2, does VictimConnect improve delivery of victim services? 3, does VictimConnect protect victims' rights and confidentiality? And 4, does VictimConnect strengthen the efficiency of victim services? And these, as well as the implementation and outcome-specific sub-research questions, of which there's like 23, that are under each of these, are answered using both qualitative and quantitative data, which is kind of outlined generally here. So we wanted to make sure that we chose meaningful research methods that capture data representing the voices of, crime survivors who visit VictimConnect, whether the website or who actually talk to a person by phone, chat, or text. We wanted to capture voices of VictimConnect staff, including, frontline hotline operators and leadership, as well as other service providers and hotline collaborators in the field. So with that in mind, we conducted almost 1,000 visitor surveys comparing people who said they talked to a VAS with those who only visited the website or who tried to connect with staff when the hotline was closed. We conducted over 350 observations, so quietly and confidentially listening in on a random sample of calls, similar to how a supervisor observes, a VAS during their training. And then we reviewed a random sample of chats and texts as well. We conducted over 250 surveys of staff that were collected by random prompts following, their interactions with visitors, asking how the interaction went, how helpful they thought it was, and so forth. And then we conducted over 20 interviews with staff and stakeholders. The stakeholders primarily were members of the National Hotline Consortium that John introduced. Okay, wait. I think I went too fast. Okay. And then lastly, we collected a number of data sources from the program itself. So Google Analytics, aggregate interactions from the database that the VAS fill out after each interaction, and then from the Hotline platform itself. So since the visitor survey is, the most complicated, most important to make sure we got right, given the, VictimConnect's foundation of anonymity and victim-centered services, I thought it might be helpful to share just a little bit more about what we did here. So we spent a lot of time in the formative phase figuring out how we were going to recruit participants in a way that didn't interrupt services, and what we were going to collect in that survey. We ended up having the VAS share about the opportunity at the end of their interactions with visitors who they deemed, were not in immediate crisis, using language that we worked on developing together. We also had a banner on the VictimConnect website and automated messages about it on phone, chat, and text when the hotline was closed in order to capture our comparison group. So visitors who went to the link were taken to, a separate web page to review informed consent and take the survey, at the end of which they had the option to share an email address that they considered safe to receive a gift card, and 1 month later, an invitation for another follow-up survey, and then which they would get another gift card for. So the survey responses were, downloaded into a secure folder, and the email addresses kept separately. And one particular challenge that I want to note and acknowledge is when we piloted the survey, we encountered a great deal of fraudulent responses, which led us to change some of the language that we used to advertise it, and we implemented over a dozen fraud checks and to make sure that we were compensating and analyzing valid responses. So I can pause there. John, do you have any thoughts you want to share on the survey's, success or challenges, or your staff's experiences sharing it?
Yeah, thanks, Mallory. The good news was buy-in was immediate, right? So it was very easy to sort of get folks on board with providing the information related to the survey. I think the only minor hiccup was just getting them to incorporate it in their process, right? And reminding them to remind visitors at the end of those interactions, you've had a difficult conversation, maybe there's some vicarious trauma going on. And so really it just took a lot of training around when to share it and when not to. If the conversation was a bit too heavy, we gave guidance. Maybe this isn't the person, right, the visitor that you might encourage to take this survey. But if it was a relatively easy interaction, go ahead and remember to incorporate that into what you do as you sort of close out the interaction. Otherwise, I think it went really well.
So, kind of along those lines, I just want to highlight a few of the ways that we built in researcher practitioner collaboration in this study. And in addition to some of the ways that John and I have shared already, like the practitioner research capacity building and creating the evaluation plans, I kind of highlighted as part of the formative evaluation. But those other three really happened in this phase, including how John talked about with sending out the invitations. But NCVC also conducted a vicarious trauma training for our team prior to us conducting observations of hotline interactions, which was really helpful for preparing us for that experience and supporting my team's well-being in that process. And then lastly, I just want to say that we had multiple checkpoints throughout the study where we shared early data or particular findings that were coming up, particular trends that we were seeing as it was going on, for NCVC, our partners, to begin learning from that and also to help us interpret that. Like, are we on the right track? Does this seem accurate? I don't know, John, before we move on to the findings, is there anything else you want to weigh in on the ease or burden of participating, or how you felt the study was victim-centered and aligned with your work?
Yeah, I really appreciated Urban's collaborative approach. You all really trusted us as equal partners and trusted us as experts in this field. And so that was really helpful. I know there were a couple moments where we had to kind of make a little bit of adjustments, and you all were really flexible in that, making sure that all materials that were going out were provided in multiple languages, for example, was a thing that we sort of reassessed and determined would be valuable. And so we did that. And just really appreciative of the way that you all were respectful of our approach and our value for transparency and confidentiality.
Thank you. Okay, so we're gonna turn to the findings, but I do see a few questions in the Q&A that might be helpful for us to answer real quick before we move on. So first, for John, is the National Hotline Consortium only for national level hotlines, and how might others join?
Yeah, I would encourage you to go to our website. You can go to victimconnect.org, or you can go to our parent site, victimsofcrime.org. It outlines all of what the requirements that it would take for one to be a part of the Hotline Consortium.
And then there's a few around like the evaluation methods. So if a newly forming hotline is interested in joining, how might one reach out? As well as, would you be willing to share the language used when referring callers to the survey? Absolutely. My email address is at the end of the slides, and feel free to reach out to me for examples of the language that we used, or to talk about future replication studies. And then, was there a standard evaluation used when confidentially reviewing phone chat texts? Yeah, we had a protocol programmed into Qualtrics that each of us used when observing those calls, so that we were using the same metrics and when we were using the same language, and we also piloted that protocol during the pilot phase at the very beginning of our study, to make sure that we were understanding all those questions and metrics the same. So yes, they should have all been standardized. Okay, all right. I will stop that, and let's move on. Okay. So I'm going to share findings in kind of three main buckets with John weighing in throughout, starting with what we learned about VictimConnect's users, then some of findings around the technology and access, and then the services and outcomes. All right, so starting with the users. So from the visitor survey and from the VictimConnect demographics database that the staff fill out after each interaction, we know that the vast majority of visitors are victims themselves, as opposed to family, friends, service providers, and our first-time users. We also confirmed that, VictimConnect reaches people from all backgrounds. Of those who took the survey, most were female. There's a slightly larger share who were unemployed or who were from urban areas, but we had respondents from all situations and backgrounds, as well as from a wide range of ages and educations. And when we compared people who had connected with a VAS to those who had not, visitors who connected with staff tended to be younger and more educated than those who did not connect. But there were no differences in who connected based on employment, location, or sex. We also found that half of the visitors surveyed had already sought services for the victimization they experienced. But that only a third said that they were familiar with local services or resources. And I feel like this finding really emphasizes the value that VictimConnect brings as a referral resource for people who might not have been getting what they needed somewhere else, or who aren't aware of what even is available. So visitors reported what victimization experiences brought them to VictimConnect in the survey, and also the VAS recorded victimizations in their internal database based on what the visitor told them. And the top three victimizations are the same in both data sets, right? Stalking, non-sexual harassment, and intimate partner violence were most commonly experienced by visitors. The first two, especially stalking and non-sexual harassment, tend to be victimizations that don't have a lot of their own specific dedicated resources. There's not another kind of national hotline focused on that. And many federal resources, including the Office on Violence Against Women and the Stalking Resource Center, refer to VictimConnect on their web pages. So I think a lot of that kind of explains why VictimConnect has kind of become a go-to resource for those victims. Experiencing multiple victimizations is also very common in both data sets, with 75% of the surveyed visitors identifying more than one victimization, which I think is also a big part of the reason people come to VictimConnect, right? I think there's a lot of victimization specific hotlines and resources, but if you have a lot of different needs, you might come to somewhere like VictimConnect, which is a little more generalized. And I also think that kind of aligns with why the numbers that we're seeing in the visitor survey in this slide are so much higher than what the VAS are reporting. Right. I think it kind of makes sense that, visitors might be only sharing about the most immediate or pressing needs to the hotline provider they're talking to. But when presented with a list of victimizations and asked, which ones describe the experience that brought you to VictimConnect, they might be reporting a lot more. So I think, that's kind of something people intrinsically can know or understand, but I think it's powerful to see. John, do you have any insights on the data around victimization to share?
Yeah, just that it was specific to the stalking data point. We talked a little bit about the importance of being really clear and specific in language, right? And updating language around what we consider to be stalking. We've observed the phenomenon known as gang stalking has been occurring a lot, and we've been getting lots of calls about that. Folks reporting a perceived experience of being followed by various systems and government organizations and the like. And so understanding how to sort of differentiate between stalking and some other kind of stalking is going to be really important to make sure that we get the best data and clearest data possible.
Yeah, and based on, you know, the context that we got from John around some of those gang stalking experiences and how that is kind of a unique you know, population of visitors, we also started kind of creating a like proxy variable to assess potential gang stalking victims in our survey data by saying, and you know, the people who identified, you know, stalking and non-sexual harassment, you know, but nothing else, are most likely gang stalking victims. And so that's kind of how we maybe tease out those a little bit in our data, but I think there's a lot more that can be done to understand their needs. And so I'm glad that that you all are doing more in your data sets going forward to differentiate that. Okay, so we asked visitors why they contacted VictimConnect and to select all that apply. And what resulted is a wide range of services and resources needed by visitors, with legal assistance, financial assistance, and crime reporting being the most common. But all were selected by, you know, more than a quarter of the participants. There were also some differences based on the victimization experienced by visitors. So just one example, financial assistance was more likely to be needed by visitors who reported intimate partner violence, sexual assault, or economic crimes, compared to visitors who did not identify any of those victimizations, and less likely to be needed by visitors who reported stalking. So in our report, we'll you know, we walk through kind of each of the those needs and what victimizations experiences are more likely to result in those, but that's just one example here. And then we asked survey participants why they chose VictimConnect. Ease of use, safety, and privacy were the most selected reasons why they chose VictimConnect. However, you know, roughly a fifth of visitors also chose it due to, you know, awareness or availability of other services. And diving into that data a little bit more, so people who chose VictimConnect for ease of use, safety, and privacy were more likely to connect with a staff member than those who did not cite those reasons. And people who connected or who cited ease of use were also more likely to use chat or text than use the phone, which I think is interesting. And then conversely, people who said other services weren't available were less likely to connect with a VAS. And then those who did connect were also less likely to use chat than to call. In terms of the victimizations, people who experienced stalking, intimate partner violence, assault, family violence, and identity theft were more likely to say they chose VictimConnect because other services were not available in their area. Okay, so that's kind of the overview of what we learned about some of the users. Let me just pause really quickly. Yes, the list of victimizations up there is not exhaustive. So there, in our survey, we asked about 24 different victimization experiences, and during the data, you know, collection period, NCVC was cataloging like 35 different victimization experiences. So yes, there's a lot more out there. People experienced a very wide range of harms and crimes, but I just wanted to highlight like the most common here. So if you would like to see more and how often something like human trafficking was experienced, or gun violence or homicide, or, you know, lots of these other kind of specific harms that don't occur as often, that data will be in our report. Okay. All right, so moving on to technology and access. So first of all, I hope you appreciate this chart, which shows the dramatic increase in visitors that VictimConnect experienced last year as they worked to increase their hours from, you know, 9 to 5, Monday to Friday, to 24/7, which is a huge effort on John's part, and I applaud you for that. across this time span, roughly 70% connected by phone, 20% by chat, and 10% by text. However, the share of chats and texts increased as the hours expanded. In 2024, most of the contacts still occur during the day, though the proportion of chats and texts increased at night as that became more available. And then VictimConnect also significantly increased the number of non-native English speakers served from 2023 to 2024. John, do you want to add anything about that increase in hours and language access?
Yeah, just to your point, it was quite the undertaking, but very worth it. I'm really grateful that we were in a position to be able to do it. I'm sure I don't have to share with those who are familiar with Hotline or helpline operations that it can be a really tricky balance, ensuring that you have the funding to meet the need while balancing the ways in which the need changes, retention issues, and the like. So I'm really grateful that we got to a place where we're able to sustain 24-hour, 7-day-a-week service.
Okay, so just a little bit about how the three modalities differ. Our data confirmed what hotline staff reported in our interviews, which is that calls are shorter and more direct than chats or texts. You can see here the average duration of the observed calls was around 12 minutes, while the average duration of chats was 32 minutes and 41 minutes for texts. And what we heard from staff is that, callers tend to be more engaged, whereas people who are chatting and texting can, just by nature of that mode, can walk away, get distracted, put their phone down, come back, forget to come back, or something else can come up. Staff also thought that people using chat or text might want an added layer of privacy. A few differences by both demographic and victimization. Our survey indicated that younger visitors and male visitors were both more likely to chat or text than to call, but that visitors with higher levels of employment were more likely to use the phone. And then there are also a few differences by victimization listed here. A few like IPV, sexual assault, more likely to call than to chat or text, and then non-sexual harassment and economic crime victims are more likely to chat. But then there were also a few, regardless of that were more likely to just use the website and look for resources there than to talk to a person. So 92% of our surveyed visitors were satisfied with or felt neutral about the technology. Most also thought it was easy to use, accessible, and felt safe and private. There were no statistical differences in by mode of connection, but there were some differences by whether somebody connected with a VAS or not, which is what's presented here on this slide. And then there are also a few probably what I would consider logical differences by demographics. So visitors who were under the age of 35 were more likely to say that it was easy to use, accessible, and to say that they were satisfied with the technology. And then rural visitors were less likely to say that it was easy to use and express satisfaction, but there was no difference in their perceptions of accessibility. So I'm not quite sure why it would be easy, but not easy, but accessible. But there you go. Okay. All right. So that is what we have on technology. Let's see if there are any. Don't see any new questions. All right. So moving on to kind of the big piece of what services were provided and what outcomes they resulted in. So we asked visitors who connected with VAS what they had discussed, and they reported a wide range of topics with information about their options and referrals to service providers being most common. And the VAS's database adds some additional context in which they reported giving referrals in 80% of 70% of interactions, which is compared to 26% in which a referral, was not relevant based on the the visitor's needs. And then in only 4% of interactions do visitors decline a referral. So very common, pretty much one of the big cornerstones of VictimConnect's mission here is to provide those local and specific referrals. So thinking about how accurate and effective those are, which we assessed from both the VAS's perspective and from the visitor's perspective. Overall, the VAS and the visitors who spoke to staff both agreed that the services provided were helpful and that the referrals met visitors' needs. The VAS reported higher helpfulness when asked about like specific types of services, largely because half the interactions they rated as unhelpful were due to technology issues or the visitor not responding. They also reported slightly higher helpfulness for phone and chat interactions than for text interactions. And then the visitors who connected over phone also reported that the referrals provided met their needs more often than visitors who chatted and texted, though I will say all are very high. And then while significantly lower than those who connected with staff, half of those who did not connect still reported being able to find information on the website to meet their needs. So we then looked at how successful VictimConnect's referrals were in terms of the intention to contact the referral and then actual follow through 1 month later. Again, keeping in mind that some people were only seeking information or emotional support, for example, and had no intention to take action yet. So bearing that in mind, the effectiveness of referrals did not vary by phone versus chat or text, but as you'll see as a trend throughout, was significantly higher for people who spoke to somebody than who only visited the website. We found that nearly 90% of people who spoke with a VAS said that they were likely to follow up on a referral. And then 1 month later, 2 out of 3 people had followed up on that referral. So very exciting kind of uptake to see. And then the longitudinal survey also gives us some more specific information about the next steps taken by respondents and who they connected with, who they talked to, with high rates of reporting to plan for their safety, share the information they learned with someone else, contact legal services, talk to a family member or friend, and then about half reported, talking to law enforcement. And then 1 month later, looking at which actions they took, an astonishing like 3/4 had actually planned for their safety. 2/3 had talked to family or friends, about half had shared the information or contacted legal services, and then a little less than that had contacted law enforcement. And regarding safety planning, we also asked in the survey about whether they got information from VictimConnect to help them with safety planning, and visitors who spoke with a VAS were almost twice as likely to say yes, that they had gotten information for their safety. And again, continuing the trend, visitors who talked to or chatted with staff were significantly more likely to report increased knowledge about resources and options than those who only visited the website. About 6 or 7 out of 10 visitors who interacted with VAS reported higher, knowledge about where to get help for their health, their rights as victims, legal choices, and the people and places in their community that can help. And then they're also more likely to report having a plan to find stable housing as a result of their interaction. And all of that is compared to only about 3 or 4 out of 10 victims who did not talk to somebody. And again, comparing those two groups, we found that about 6 in 10 visitors who interacted with a VAS reported significantly higher hopefulness about the future compared to, again, 3 out of 10 visitors who did not. And similarly, about half reported that their interaction helped them regain a sense of control and address the emotional effects of the victimization. And visitors who connected with a VAS also reported very positive experiences with staff. So across the board, they felt, included and validated. 9 out of 10 felt, treated with respect. 8 out of 10 emotionally supported, and that staff understood their needs. And these feelings of respect, support, and being understood correlated with the emotional well-being outcomes that I just shared on the previous slide. John, is there anything you want to say about how the VAS are trained or supported in their work with survivors and victims?
Sure. One of the things that really stood out, and I was going to talk about a little bit more towards the end when we talk about recommendations, was just the importance of how we treat our staff, actually, like really making sure that our staff feel well taken care of can really make a big difference in the way that they take care of visitors. And I thought it was really interesting to see that manifest and see that how that kind of turned out and played out in the evaluation. I'm also really grateful to our team that we have a wonderful team of supervisors and specialists to be able to provide empathetic, person-centered support that's trauma-informed and really tailored and specific to each individual visitor's needs.
So just kind of wrapping up the data from the survey for today. 8 out of 10 who connected with a VAS felt very high satisfaction, both with the staff person that they spoke to and with VictimConnect overall, compared to about half of those who visited the website alone or tried to connect after hours. And we also found that visitors' feelings of satisfaction were related to feeling, again, positively treated by staff, perceiving VictimConnect as accessible and easy to use, and that the referrals matched their needs. John, is there anything kind of last notes about what surprised you about the outcome findings, or what outcomes you and your team are most excited to see?
Yeah, really excited just about continuous improvement in general. I think we all value, right, being able to sort of take stock of where we are and improve things for the future. Taking note of the accessibility issues related to folks in more rural areas and kind of using that to develop how we can kind of reach those populations a little bit better. There was a question about updating service lists and that kind of thing, right? Being able to reevaluate our resource map and ensure that we have the most up-to-date information for visitors so that they can find that information on their own, and making sure that our VAS stay trained and up to date on, language and modalities of delivering services so that they can deliver the most up-to-date and best services possible.
And that actually leads nicely into this slide, which is, there's kind of one other area that the visitor survey or administrative data didn't touch on that were big themes in our interviews, and that is kind of the importance of, communication, collaboration between hotlines and other victim service providers. And we really saw that taking place on 3 levels, so first, providers identified, cross-training as important for supporting more targeted referrals. Basically, victims will have a better experience if hotline staff have a strong understanding of what a service provider offers and who's eligible, and vice versa. And then, warm transfers as kind of that next level, as kind of a form of advanced referral making, where, hotline staff reach out to a provider, make sure someone's available, and gives a brief overview before connecting the visitor directly. And we saw warm transfers occurring occasionally, primarily with like local or more familiar providers. But it's an identified goal of, VictimConnect and the Hotline Consortium to become more standard practice. And then the third level being the National Hotline Consortium, which John introduced earlier, that really brings together this group of similar organizations to learn from each other and support each other and kind of share best practices. And some of the benefits that we saw included, exposure to new technologies, education on best practices and emerging trends, and an expanded network of service providers to refer to. John, is there anything else you want to share here on specifically on like warm transfers or other collaborations?
Yeah, to your point about warm transfers, I think it previously occurred a little bit less just because as a national organization, we don't necessarily refer right to always to like local agencies on a regular basis. For example, in those more rural areas, we might not interact with specific agencies or organizations as much, but we are working to kind of expand that and improve on that so that we have those relationships in place and we can do that a little bit more seamlessly.
Okay. So thinking about, what are some of the big overall, conclusions from all of this different data, and some recommendations that we pulled together. So here are some of our kind of big picture takeaways from all of this. So specifically, the need and value of having, 24/7 availability, access to trained staff that provide empathetic responses and multiple options to connect, and services that prioritize like ease of use and privacy as some of those big priorities for why visitors are making the choices they are. And then also just knowing that referrals are being used at high rates, right? That there's a strong uptake in those services. John, are there any other big takeaways for you, either for NCVC specifically or other providers?
Yeah, again, just the value of continuous improvement and really being able to pause and take stock of what's going on. I'm really grateful to Urban and you and your team for assessing everything that allowed us to understand how we were doing, right, and being able to kind of speak to what areas we need to maybe improve on, and also for me to be able to go back to our team and give them kudos for the areas where they're really excelling. So it's been really helpful to have this objective evaluation and to be able to use this as a tool for continuous improvement.
Well, with that, and related to the takeaways also, we really think that funders and policymakers, should see this and be motivated to support programs that do all those things that I just mentioned, right? The 24/7 operations, effective, confidential, accessible technology, enhanced community outreach, especially to some of those maybe rural areas or places where there are fewer partnerships and services. And there are also some ways to make sure that referrals are accurate and effective that we discussed, including, cross-training and implementing warm transfers, and some ways to support staff in their work, which John has talked about is such an important tenet of their success. Such as effective supervision, ongoing training, effective up-to-date databases, and internal communication and support, especially during challenging interactions. And then lastly, one of the big gaps that we repeatedly saw was around stalking and non-sexual harassment victims, and particularly those experiencing gang stalking. And so really hoping that the field can really work together to build up options to respond to victims who are reporting those experiences. All right. So before we, as we're wrapping up this webinar and the study, I want to share a few of the ways that we are sharing findings and how we plan to disseminate them in the coming months. We've reached both, researchers and practitioners recently, ongoing, and have many products in development at Urban and NCVC. We have 4 fact sheets that should be published next week that kind of focus on specific aspects of our findings, like collaboration or technology, who the users are, benefits of connecting with trained staff. And then the others will follow that. John, anything you want to say about how you're hoping to get findings to practitioners or who you think should be learning about this?
Yeah, I'm glad to see that there's some interest in the National Hotline Consortium. So I definitely encourage folks to visit our website to learn more about how to be a part of that. Joining our newsletter, any way that you can connect with our organization, you're going to constantly see information going out. You can find us on social media. You'll see a lot of the same information being disseminated there. And we'll be sharing our annual report early next year. So definitely encourage folks to keep in touch with us.
Yeah, and then very lastly, before we address any final questions, I also want to encourage people to engage in researcher practice collaborations. So again, I hope it's come through that we've worked really consciously to build a strong partnership between our two groups for this evaluation, and from our perspective as on the research side, I think that ongoing dialogue and perspective was really critical to success. And, I know John's mentioned engaging in this study because, it's so important to document victims' needs and also, making the case for their program and funding and identifying areas for improvement and identifying gaps that can be filled. So acknowledging, obviously, it takes time, it takes resources, but I think the benefits are really clear, and hope you'll all consider engaging in research in the future. All right. Any last thoughts, John, before we turn to some questions?
No, looking forward to answering some questions.
Great. All right, let's see. All right, and feel free to add any new questions if you haven't to the chat or the Q&A.
There was one that I touched on about who maintains
Yeah,
our
go
list
for
of
it.
providers. I can kind of go in more depth about that. So we have a small team, a small but mighty team. So we get help from a couple different people within my department and others outside of my department to kind of vet those lists on an ongoing basis. The process is not super formal as yet, but we do look at the list a couple times a year just to make sure that we have up-to-date information. And that can entail visiting websites, speaking with partners that we have closer relationships with, just to make sure that we're up to date in terms of services, hours of operation, and the like.
Great. And then I see a question about whether we surveyed how visitors learned about VictimConnect. Excellent question. We did. We did survey that. And 78% said they found it through an internet search. Again, so this was a select all question. So it does not add to 100. Do not try. So 78% said they found it through an internet search. 10%. I'm going to try to remember all these details. 10% were referred by another hotline, 10% from, I think, another service provider, I think 6% from law enforcement, and then another handful percentage from word of mouth. But diving into that just a little bit, the people who spoke to a VAS were much more likely to have been referred from one of those other sources than people who just went to the website, who were more likely to find it through the internet. So hopefully that is helpful. Okay. All right. Could you share a bit about how visitors are connected with VAS based on the various needs? And John, this is probably for you, but my guess is that question, I don't think visitors are connected to a specific VAS. It's basically like first come, like rolling, right? Whoever is available takes the call, and everybody just kind of has the same training to respond to needs, right? Hopefully I'm interpreting that question correctly.
Yeah, if that was, I'm interpreting it the same way, and then yes, your answer is correct.
All right. Okay, and then data on the percentage of calls that were not answered or dropped. We do have that. I don't have it at the top of my head though. But yeah, the platform data would be able to provide some of that, and we've looked at it a little bit, but I don't know that number to share today. Sorry. Okay. Oh, all right. Sorry, the chat is disabled. Thank you for putting questions in the Q&A. Okay. Do you capture info about the age of victims? John, do you want to? We did ask age in the survey, but that might be a better question for John for how the staff are documenting that.
Yeah, because our services are completely confidential and anonymous, we don't ask visitors their age. However, if it comes up as a result of, for example, in your example of needing services related to elder abuse, there might be eligibility requirements. And so that might sort of get us to conversations around specific age ranges or someone's actual age. But we don't actually ask any of that kind of personal and data identifying information.
Yeah, it was interesting looking at the data. Since there's so much that's not provided, right? There's so much that's not answered in the course of, or that comes up naturally in the course of, somebody providing referrals and services. But of the people who had identified an age or an age range in their interaction, and then the vast, recorded it. I think it was like 33% of those were over the age of 65. So I think it does serve a high number of older adults, and then much higher than we saw in the visitor survey, which might just be a limitation of the visitor survey, and that older adults might be less likely to respond to an online survey than younger folks. But I know you also kind of document specific crime types and trends, like if something is specifically elder abuse or a hate crime or gun violence, something like that. So there's some information about those trends, but it's not comprehensive due to the nature of the anonymity. Okay.
Mallory, I want to jump in with one. At the beginning, you talked about how the final phase will be encouraging replication of this study. And you mentioned that there will be some tools made available, but people are really eager to know how exactly they can get started on that. Is there a place where they can sign up to receive that information when it's available, or do you know where it will be posted? I know at CVR we'd be happy to share that information, but what can we tell people about how they could do something similar?
Yeah, so there will be like we'll publish all of our final instruments on the Urban website, along with all of our reports and briefs. As a federal study, it will also be archived, like all the data. The identified data will be archived, as well as the instruments at the national and the National Archive of Criminal Justice Data. There we go. And then, yeah, I think, Susan, that's a great idea to also include those instruments in CVR's collection as well. But also, if you are interested in discussing potential evaluation, I also encourage you to reach out to me. I can go ahead and put the contact info there, as well as to my co-PI, Jennifer, who I am going to put in her email in the chat. Oh, actually, I don't know if I can. Maybe Jennifer, maybe you can send it to Susan after.
I can put her contact information in chat. And speaking of chat, I want folks to know that the link to the feedback form is posted there, and that's where you will be able to request copies of the slides or request a certificate. One other question that I had, you mentioned that your activities included researcher observations of VictimConnect, but then you didn't talk about specifically what came out of that. Can you talk about the usefulness of that phase of the project?
Sure. Yeah, very briefly. I know we're at time. But yeah, we were able to do a lot of kind of corroborating of kind of those trends that the VAS were reporting either in their survey or in the database, in terms of what the rate of referrals are, what the what services they're providing, what the victimization needs are. And then that's where we were able to get some of our data around the length of experience of contacts and some of the details around challenges that were experienced. And then just kind of a third-party perception of helpfulness as well.
Great. I don't know if you want to make one final spin through the questions and see if there's anything else you'd like to touch on.
There's a few, but I know we're at time, so maybe we can send some, see if we addressed anything.
All right. Yes, we will make sure that the presenters get a copy of all of these questions. And when we send out the link to the recording, we'll include any new answers to questions. But I want to thank both of you for this fascinating look at all of the work and all of the value that results from evaluating a victim hotline. We really applaud you for this work and especially for coming up with real recommendations that are going to improve operations. And thanks for modeling how you have an effective researcher-practitioner partnership.
Of course, thanks so much, Susan, for having us, and thanks everyone for attending today and for your thoughtful questions.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Susan.